The gavel didn't just bang. It sounded like a gunshot ending Claire's life. Across the aisle, Beatrice Sterling didn't just smile. She smirked, clutching the deed to the house Claire had built with her own hands. They had taken everything, her savings, her car, even her late husband's wedding ring. The law seemed entirely on their side. But as the bailiff moved to dismiss the court, the judge stopped mid-sentence. He adjusted his glasses, staring at a sealed envelope that had been ignored for 3 days. "Mrs. Sterling," the judge said softly, "you haven't read the final page." The rain at the funeral felt cliché, but to Claire Bennett, it felt like the universe was trying to wash her away. She stood by the open grave, the mud slick under her black heels, staring at the mahogany casket that held Ethan. Ethan Sterling, the man who had laughed with her over burnt toast, who had promised they would travel to Italy next spring, and who had died on a slick highway 3 days ago because a drunk driver couldn't stay in his lane. Claire felt hollowed out, a shell. She reached out to place a single white rose on the casket, her hand trembling. "Don't touch him." The voice was low, sharp, and cut through the sound of the rain like a serrated knife. Claire froze. She looked up to see Beatrice Sterling, her mother-in-law, standing on the other side of the grave. Beatrice was a woman carved from ice and old money, draped in a black veil that cost more than Claire's first car. Beside her stood Arthur Sterling, Ethan's father, looking at the horizon as if bored by the grief. "Beatrice, please," Claire whispered, her voice cracking. "He was my husband." "He was my son," Beatrice hissed, stepping closer, her heels sinking into the expensive turf of the private cemetery. "And now that he is gone, the mistake of this marriage can finally be corrected." Claire blinked, confusion fighting through the fog of her trauma. "What are you talking about?" Beatrice didn't answer. She simply turned to the family chauffeur, a man named Henderson, who had always looked at Claire with pity. "Henderson, escort Miss Bennett to her vehicle. She is leaving." "Miss Bennett?" Claire repeated, the slight stinging. "My name is Claire Sterling." "Not for long," Arthur spoke up for the first time, his voice dry and devoid of emotion. "Enjoy the drive back to the city, Claire. You'll find the locks at the estate have already been changed." Claire felt the blood drain from her face. "The estate? That's my home. Ethan and I—" "Ethan is dead," Beatrice snapped, finally dropping the facade of composure. Her eyes burned with a hatred she had suppressed for 5 years. "And without him protecting you, you are nothing but what you always were. A gold-digging waitress who got lucky. But luck runs out." Claire was too stunned to fight. Henderson gently touched her elbow. "Ma'am, please, don't make a scene here. Not in front of the guests." Claire looked around. The guests were the elite of Boston society. Senators, CEOs, people who had tolerated Claire because Ethan adored her. Now they looked away, examining their umbrellas or checking their watches. The pack had turned. Numbly, Claire allowed herself to be led away. She got into her modest sedan, the one thing she had kept from before the marriage, and drove. When she arrived at the sprawling Sterling estate in Dover, the gate was shut. She punched in the code, "Access denied." She tried again. "Access denied." Her heart hammering against her ribs, she parked the car and ran to the pedestrian gate. It was chained. Through the iron bars, she could see movement on the driveway, a moving truck. "Hey!" she screamed, rattling the gates. "What are you doing? That's my house!" A man in a blue jumpsuit walked over, holding a clipboard. "Sorry, lady. We have orders from the owners to clear the premises of unauthorized tenant property." "I am the owner!" Claire shouted, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "Not according to the deed transfer filed this morning." the man said, shrugging. He pointed to the curb. There, sitting in the rain, were 3 cardboard boxes. They said, "This is your stuff." Claire stared at the boxes. She recognized them. They weren't her clothes. They weren't her jewelry. They were old paperbacks, a few framed photos of her parents, and her old college laptop. Everything else, her wardrobe, the jewelry Ethan had given her, the furniture they had picked out together, the safe with their emergency cash, was locked inside. Her phone buzzed, a notification from her bank. Alert. Joint checking account ending in 8842 has been frozen due to probate litigation. Alert. Credit card ending in 1190 has been cancelled by the primary account holder. Claire dropped to her knees on the wet pavement, the 3 soggy boxes the only testament to her life with the man she loved. Beatrice hadn't just locked her out. She had erased her. The next morning, Claire woke up in a Motel 6 on the outskirts of the city. She had paid with the last $40 of cash she had in her purse. She sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, staring at the news on the muted TV. The headline on the local channel read, "Tragedy strikes Sterling Dynasty. Heir dead. Estate in turmoil." There was no mention of a grieving widow. She needed a lawyer. But lawyers cost money, and Arthur Sterling had frozen everything. She scrolled through her contacts until she found a name she hadn't used in years. Sarah Jenkins. They had gone to law school together before Claire dropped out to care for her sick mother, the event that led her to waitressing and eventually to Ethan. Sarah agreed to meet her at a diner. When Claire walked in, wearing the same black dress from the funeral, Sarah gasped. "Claire, you look... God, I'm so sorry about Ethan." Claire didn't have the energy for pleasantries. She slid a crumpled letter across the table. It had been slipped under her motel door that morning. "They served me," Claire said, her voice raspy. Sarah adjusted her glasses and read the document. Her eyes widened. This is aggressive, Claire. This is a petition for annulment based on fraud, coupled with a writ of possession for the estate." "Fraud?" Claire choked out a laugh. "We were married for 5 years." "They're claiming you misrepresented your financial status and family background to induce the marriage," Sarah read, shaking her head. "It's garbage, but it ties up the assets. And look at this. They are invoking the Sterling Family Trust Clause." "What's that?" "It says that upon the death of a beneficiary, Ethan, all assets revert to the primary trust held by Arthur and Beatrice, unless there is a surviving heir of blood relation." Sarah looked up, sympathetic. "You and Ethan? You didn't have children?" Claire looked down, her hand instinctively touching her stomach. "We were trying. I actually had a doctor's appointment scheduled for next week to check. But no children." "Then they have a case," Sarah said grimly. "The Sterling Trust is ironclad. It was written by Ethan's grandfather, Old Man Sterling, who was notoriously paranoid about outsiders. If the assets revert to the trust, Claire, you don't just lose the house. You lose the life insurance, the savings, the investments. Everything goes back to Arthur." "But Ethan wrote a will," Claire insisted. "He told me. He wrote it right after we got married. He left everything to me." Sarah flipped to the second page of the lawsuit. "They're contesting the will. They claim Ethan was under undue influence and mental duress when he signed it. They have an affidavit from a Dr. Aris Thorne." "Dr. Thorne," Claire interrupted. "That was Beatrice's private psychiatrist. Ethan never saw him." "It doesn't matter if it's true," Sarah said, closing the folder. "It matters that they have deeper pockets than you. They can drag this out for years. By the time you prove the will is valid, you'll be bankrupt and homeless. Claire, they are trying to starve you into a settlement. They want you to sign a waiver, take maybe 50,000 and disappear." Claire stared at the coffee cup. 50,000. It was enough to start over. Enough to go back to being a nobody. Beatrice would win. Arthur would win. They would wash Ethan's memory clean of her. She remembered the last night she saw Ethan. He had been stressed about work, about his parents. He had held her face in his hands and said, "You are the only real thing in my life, Claire. If anything happens to me, don't let them bully you. Promise me." Claire looked up at Sarah, her eyes hardening. "No," Claire said. "No," Sarah asked. "I'm not signing anything. I'm not taking a settlement. I'm going to fight them." Sarah sighed, leaning back. "Claire, I'm a family law attorney in a strip mall. The Sterlings have retained Garrett Blackwood." Claire froze. Garrett Blackwood was known as the Reaper. He was the most expensive, ruthless litigator in New York. He didn't lose. He destroyed. "I don't care if they hired the devil himself," Claire said, standing up. "Ethan wouldn't want me to run." 2 weeks later, the preliminary hearing. The courtroom was cold, smelling of floor wax and stale coffee, but the chill coming from the plaintiff's table was worse. Beatrice sat there, looking immaculate in a navy Chanel suit, not a hair out of place. Beside her sat Garrett Blackwood. He was a shark of a man, tanned, silver-haired, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Claire sat at the defendant's table with Sarah. Sarah looked nervous. She kept shuffling her papers. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. "The Honorable Judge Harold P. Mercer, presiding." Judge Mercer walked in. He was an older man, with a face like crumpled leather and weary eyes. He had been on the bench for 30 years and had seen every kind of family squabble imaginable. He sat down, groaning slightly, and peered over his spectacles. "Docket number 4492, Estate of Ethan Sterling. Plaintiffs Arthur and Beatrice Sterling versus Claire Sterling. Let's get on with it." Blackwood stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, this case is simple. The late Ethan Sterling was the beneficiary of a generational trust. The terms are explicit. Upon his death without issue, the assets return to the trust. The defendant, Ms. Bennett, as we prefer to call her, given the pending annulment, is attempting to hijack family assets that were never hers." "Hijack?" Sarah stood up, her voice trembling slightly. "Your Honor, my client was his wife of 5 years. There is a valid will leaving her the estate." "A will signed under duress," Blackwood countered smoothly. "We have witness testimony that Ms. Bennett isolated Ethan from his family, manipulated his medication, and forced him to sign documents he did not understand." "That is a lie!" Claire shouted, unable to stop herself. "Order," Judge Mercer said, banging the gavel lazily. "Ms. Sterling, speak through your attorney." "Your Honor," Blackwood continued, sliding a thick document toward the bench. "We are filing an emergency motion to freeze all assets and evict the defendant from any properties owned by the trust. We also ask for a restraining order, as Miss Bennett has already attempted to break into the main estate." "I went to get my clothes," Claire cried out. Judge Mercer looked at the documents. He flipped through them, his expression unreadable. "The trust document seems clear regarding the bloodline reversion," Mercer muttered. He looked at Sarah. "Miss Jenkins, do you have any evidence that counters the grandfather's trust stipulations?" We are looking for the original copy of Ethan's will, Your Honor," Sarah stammered. "But the copy we have is a photocopy," Blackwood interrupted. "Inadmissible without the original, which, curiously, Miss Bennett cannot produce. Likely because she destroyed it when she realized it wasn't generous enough." Beatrice let out a delicate, staged sob. Arthur patted her hand. Judge Mercer rubbed his temples. Without the original will, the trust dictates the flow of assets. I am granting the temporary injunction. Ms. Sterling, you are barred from the estate and all financial accounts until the trial concludes. Blackwood smirked. Thank you, Your Honor. We also move for the trial to be expedited. My clients are grieving parents who just want closure. Set for 3 weeks from today, Mercer said. Next case. Claire felt the floor drop out from under her. 3 weeks. She had 3 weeks to find a document she had never seen, fight a $1 billion trust, and survive with zero money. As they filed out of the courtroom, Beatrice stopped Claire in the aisle. You should have taken the $50,000, Beatrice whispered. Now I'm going to sue you for the legal fees. You'll be paying me for the rest of your miserable life. Claire stared at her. Why do you hate me so much? I made him happy. You made him common, Beatrice spat, and you stole him from us. Now, I'm taking him back. Claire walked out into the bright, harsh sunlight. She felt defeated, but as she reached the bottom of the courthouse steps, a man in a rumpled trench coat was leaning against a pillar, smoking a cigarette. He looked like a detective from a 1950s movie, out of place in the modern plaza. He flicked the cigarette away and looked at Claire. Mrs. Sterling, he rasped. Yes, Claire said, guarding herself. If you're a reporter, I have no comment. I'm not a reporter, the man said. He reached into his coat pocket. Claire flinched, but he only pulled out a business card. It was blank, except for a handwritten phone number. Who are you? I'm the guy Ethan hired 6 months ago, the man said. He thought his parents were cooking the books on the family business. He was gathering evidence. Claire's eyes widened. Evidence? Of what? Embezzlement, tax fraud, the works. Ethan was going to turn them in, Claire. That's why he was so stressed. The man lowered his voice. And he didn't just write a will, he wrote a codicil, an addition to the trust. Where is it? Claire asked, her heart pounding. I don't have it, the man said. Ethan hid it. He said, if anything happens to me, tell Claire to look where we had our first fight. Claire blinked. Their first fight. He said the Reaper, Blackwood, knows about it, the man added. That's why they hired him, to bury it. You find that paper, you don't just win the house, kid. You own them. You own the whole damn Sterling empire. The man turned and walked away, disappearing into the city crowd before Claire could ask his name. Look where we had our first fight. Claire closed her eyes, thinking back 5 years. It wasn't at a restaurant. It wasn't at an apartment. It was at the old, dusty library in downtown Boston. They had fought because Ethan wanted to buy a first edition of The Count of Monte Cristo for $5,000, and Claire told him it was irresponsible. She opened her eyes. The library. The Boston Public Library was a cathedral of silence, a stark contrast to the chaotic noise inside Claire's head. She hadn't been here in years, not since that rainy Tuesday 5 years ago, when she and Ethan had stood in the rare books section, hissing at each other in hushed tones. $5,000, Ethan. We need that for the rent deposit, she had whispered furiously. It's an investment, Claire. It's Duma. It's about patience and revenge. It's perfect. He hadn't bought the book that day. She had won the argument. But looking back, Claire realized Ethan had always been playing a longer game. She walked past the marble lions, her heels clicking softly on the stone floor. She bypassed the rare books room and went straight to the general fiction stacks, aisle 14, shelf B, Duma. Her heart sank. The shelf was packed. There were dozens of editions of The Count of Monte Cristo, hardcovers, paperbacks, newer translations. If Ethan had hidden something here, it was a needle in a haystack. She began pulling them out, one by one, shaking them. Nothing. Dust motes danced in the light. She felt foolish. The man in the trench coat could have been crazy. Or worse, a plant sent by Beatrice to waste her time while they liquidated the accounts. She reached for a beat-up, dark blue hardcover on the top shelf. It looked old, library-bound in the 90s. As she pulled it down, she noticed the spine. It didn't have the usual library call number sticker. It had a piece of white tape with a hand-drawn symbol. A white knight chess piece. Claire's breath hitched. Ethan taught her chess on their second date. He always played white. He always opened with the knight. She opened the book. It wasn't a library book at all. It was the $5,000 first edition he had wanted to buy that day. He must have come back and bought it, then hidden it here, hiding a fortune in plain sight among common paperbacks. She flipped the cover open. The inside was hollowed out. Sitting in the cavity wasn't a will. It was a small silver key and a folded index card. Claire picked up the card. It was Ethan's handwriting, hasty and jagged. "Claire, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I didn't tell you everything. I wanted to protect you from the rot in this family. The key is for Safety Deposit Box 404 at Sovereign Bank on Boylston. Don't trust the lawyers. Don't trust the police. Trust the clause. I love you. Checkmate." "Found something interesting, Mrs. Sterling?" The voice was smooth, deep, and terrifyingly close. Claire slammed the book shut and spun around. Standing at the end of the aisle was a man she recognized from the preliminary hearing. He was Garrett Blackwood's paralegal, a hulking man named Silas, who looked more like a bouncer than a legal assistant. "I don't know what you're talking about," Claire said, clutching the book to her chest. "Mr. Blackwood hates loose ends," Silas said, taking a step forward. The aisle was narrow. There was no other exit. "Hand over the book, Claire. Arthur is willing to up the settlement. 100,000. Cash. Today. You give me the book, you walk away rich. And if I don't? Then you don't walk away at all. You'll be arrested for theft of library property," Silas smirked. "Or worse." Claire looked at Silas, then at the heavy book in her hand. She thought of Ethan. She thought of Beatrice's smirk at the graveside. "Go to hell," Claire whispered. Silas lunged. Claire didn't scream. She reacted with the adrenaline of a woman who had spent 10 years carrying heavy trays and dodging drunk patrons in crowded bars. She dropped to her knees, ramming the metal library cart beside her into Silas's shins. He grunted, stumbling forward. Claire scrambled past him, but he grabbed her ankle. She kicked back hard, her heel connecting with his nose. He howled, releasing her. Claire sprinted. She ran past the startled students, past the security guard who was looking down at his phone, and burst out onto Boylston Street. She didn't stop running until she lost herself in the crowd of tourists near Copley Square. She ducked into a public restroom, her chest heaving, her hands shaking so hard she almost dropped the silver key. She looked at the book. She had the key. But Silas knew. And that meant Beatrice knew. The hunt wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was a race. By the time Claire met Sarah Jenkins at her small, cluttered office an hour later, the damage had already begun. "Don't turn on the TV," Sarah said the moment Claire walked in, looking pale. "Why? What did they do?" Claire asked, placing the silver key on Sarah's desk. Sarah sighed and pointed the remote at the wall-mounted screen. It was a local news station. The banner at the bottom read, "Widow or Black Widow. Sterling family alleges foul play." On the screen, Beatrice Sterling was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, standing next to the district attorney. "We welcomed her into our home," Beatrice sobbed into the microphones. We tried to love her. But we started noticing things missing. Money, jewelry. Ethan was terrified of her. He told us she had a temper, and now, discovering that she falsified her identity. We just want justice for our son. The reporter cut in. Sources close to the investigation say that the Sterling family has requested an autopsy review, suggesting Ethan Sterling's car crash may not have been an accident. Claire stared at the screen, horror washing over her. They're accusing me of murder. I wasn't even in the car. I was at work. They don't need to prove it, Claire, Sarah said softly, turning the TV off. They just need to destroy your credibility so that even if you find a will, a judge won't believe it. They are poisoning the jury pool before there's even a jury. I have the key, Claire said, pushing the silver object forward. Ethan left this. Box 404. Sovereign Bank. Sarah looked at the key, then at Claire. Claire, if we go to that bank, they'll be waiting. Blackwood isn't stupid. He knows about the bank. He's probably monitoring the accounts. So we just give up? No. Sarah stood up, her eyes flashing with a sudden resolve. We get smart. They expect you to go to the bank. So we don't go. We send someone else. Who? My brother works in corporate security for Sovereign, Sarah said. It's a violation of protocol, and if he gets caught, he loses his job. But he hates bullies. It took 3 agonizing days. 3 days of Claire hiding in Sarah's guest room, watching Beatrice drag her name through the mud on every channel. Beatrice told stories about Claire throwing plates, about Claire screaming at Ethan. Lies, all of them. But the public was eating it up. Justice for Ethan was trending, and the comments were calling for Claire's blood. On the 3rd night, Sarah's brother, Mike, came through the back door. He was sweating, clutching a manila envelope. I got it, Mike panted, locking the door behind him. But you guys need to move. Blackwood's team flagged the box access 5 minutes after I opened it. They're coming. Claire tore open the envelope. Inside, there was no will. What? Claire's voice broke. It's empty. No, Sarah said, pulling out a single, thick document bound in blue leather. It's not a will. Look at the title. Claire read the gold embossing. The Sterling Family Constitution. Amendment 1998. I don't understand, Claire said. What is this? Sarah opened the document, her eyes scanning the legal jargon rapidly. Her jaw dropped. Oh my God, Sarah whispered. Ethan didn't write a new will. He found the original trust charter, the one Arthur and Beatrice have been hiding for 30 years. What does it say? It says, Sarah looked up, a grin spreading across her face, that Arthur Sterling isn't the trustee. He never was. Sarah pointed to a paragraph in the middle of the page. Grandfather Sterling didn't trust Arthur. He knew his son was greedy, so he set up a moral turpitude clause. If the heir Arthur ever committed a felony, he would be stripped of all control, and the assets would pass directly to the next of kin's spouse, provided that spouse was of good moral standing. A felony? Claire asked. But Arthur has never been arrested. That's what the USB drive is for, Mike interrupted. He tossed a small black flash drive onto the table. That was in the box, too. I plugged it into my burner laptop. It's not just audio, Claire. It's ledgers. Arthur Sterling has been laundering money for the cartel for 15 years. Ethan found it. That's why they hated him. That's why they hated you. They were afraid Ethan told you. Claire felt a chill run down her spine. They didn't want the money back because they were greedy. They wanted it back because if I audited the accounts, I'd see the laundering. Exactly, Sarah said. And if we walk into court with this, we don't just win the house. We send Arthur and Beatrice to federal prison. Bang! 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 The front door shook. "Open up! Police!" A voice boomed from outside. Sarah's face went white. "They found us!" "They're not here for the evidence," Claire realized, clutching the documents. "They're here to arrest me for the murder." "Investigation," Beatrice started. "If they arrest you, they'll confiscate your personal effects," Sarah hissed. "They'll take the drive. They'll bury it." "What do we do?" Claire asked, panic rising. Sarah looked at the bathroom window. "Mike, take Claire. Go out the back. Get to the courthouse. The trial starts at 9 a.m. tomorrow. If you're not in that seat, they win by default." "What about you?" Claire grabbed Sarah's arm. "I'm the attorney." Sarah straightened her blazer. "I'll hold them off. I'll claim attorney-client privilege. I'll buy you time. But Claire, you have to walk into that courtroom tomorrow, no matter what." "I will," Claire promised. She grabbed the documents and the drive, climbing out the small bathroom window into the cold night air just as the front door splintered open. The sun rose over Boston like a bruised peach. Claire hadn't slept. She and Mike had spent the night in a 24-hour laundromat, waiting for the courts to open. At 8:45 a.m., Claire stood in front of the massive courthouse doors. She looked a mess. Her dress was wrinkled, her hair was tied back in a messy bun, and she had dark circles under her eyes. She saw the media vans, the crowd. Beatrice was there, looking fresh and regal, surrounded by reporters. Claire took a deep breath. She tightened her grip on the briefcase Mike had given her. She began to walk up the stairs. "There she is!" someone screamed. "The Black Widow!" Cameras flashed. People shouted insults. Beatrice turned, spotting Claire. A cruel smile played on her lips. She whispered something to Garrett Blackwood. Blackwood stepped forward, blocking Claire's path at the top of the stairs. 2 police officers stood behind him. "Miss Bennett," Blackwood said, his voice loud enough for the cameras. "There is a warrant for your questioning regarding the death of your husband. Officers, please escort her away." The officers moved in. "No," Claire shouted, holding the briefcase to her chest. "I have a hearing. You can't arrest me until the hearing is over." "This is a homicide investigation," Blackwood sneered. "It takes precedence over civil court." One of the officers grabbed Claire's arm. "Ma'am, come with us." "Wait!" The voice boomed from the courthouse entrance. Everyone froze. Standing in the doorway, in his full robes, was Judge Mercer. He looked angry. "Mr. Blackwood," Mercer barked, "are you attempting to intimidate a litigant on the steps of my courthouse?" "She is a suspect, Your Honor," Blackwood said smoothly. "She is a plaintiff in a case that starts in 10 minutes, Mercer said, his eyes narrowing. "Unless she is in handcuffs for an active felony committed right now, she enters my courtroom. If the police want to question her, they can wait until I adjourn for lunch. Step aside." Blackwood's jaw tightened. He nodded to the officers, who reluctantly stepped back. Claire looked at Judge Mercer. He gave her a barely perceptible nod. She walked past Blackwood, past Beatrice, whose smile had faltered, and into the safety of the building. But as she walked down the hallway toward courtroom 4B, she realized the hardest part was yet to come. She had the evidence, but Beatrice had the money, the power, and the best liar in the state. Claire pushed open the double doors. It was time to play the gambit. The courtroom was packed. It seemed all of Boston had turned out to watch the waitress widow get crushed by the Sterling dynasty. Claire sat at the defense table, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. The chair beside her, Sarah's chair, was empty. "Ms. Sterling," Judge Mercer said, looking down from the bench. He checked the clock. "It is 9:15. Where is your counsel?" She was detained, Your Honor," Claire said, her voice shaking slightly. She knew exactly where Sarah was. She was likely at the precinct, dealing with the false police report Beatrice had filed to keep her away from this trial. Garrett Blackwood stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He looked like a predator who had already smelled blood. "Your Honor," Blackwood said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy, "we cannot wait all day. This case involves significant assets and the emotional closure of grieving parents. If the defendant cannot secure counsel, I move for a default judgment in favor of the plaintiffs." Beatrice, sitting behind Blackwood, dabbed her dry eyes with a tissue, playing the part of the heartbroken mother to perfection. Judge Mercer frowned. "This is a high-stakes case, Mr. Blackwood. I am inclined to grant a recess." "With all due respect," Blackwood countered, "Ms. Bennett has had weeks. If her attorney isn't here, it's because she knows there is no case. They are stalling. We have witnesses ready to testify to the fraud and undue influence committed by this woman." Mercer looked at Claire. "Ms. Sterling, can you proceed?" Claire looked at the empty chair. Then she looked at the heavy briefcase at her feet containing the Sterling Constitution and the USB drive. She looked at Beatrice, who offered her a tiny, venomous wink. If she asked for a recess, Blackwood would argue prejudice. If she delayed, the police waiting outside might find a way to arrest her on the bogus murder charges before she could enter the evidence. Claire stood up. She smoothed the wrinkles in her dress. She thought of Ethan's note. Checkmate. "I will represent myself, Your Honor," Claire said clearly. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Blackwood chuckled audibly. "You?" Blackwood scoffed. "Ms. Bennett, this is a court of law, not a diner. You don't take orders here. You follow complex statutes. I am aware of where I am, Mr. Blackwood," Claire said, her voice hardening. "And my name is Mrs. Sterling. Proceed." Judge Mercer raised an eyebrow, impressed. "Very well. Mr. Blackwood, call your first witness." Blackwood didn't waste time. "The prosecution calls Dr. Orris Thorne." A thin, weaselly man in a sharp grey suit took the stand. He stated his credentials, a private psychiatrist with a practice on Newbury Street. "Dr. Thorne," Blackwood began, pacing in front of the jury box, though this was a bench trial he performed for the audience. "Did you treat the late Ethan Sterling?" "I did," Thorne lied effortlessly. "For 6 months prior to his death." "And what was your diagnosis?" "Ethan was suffering from severe dependency issues and cognitive decline brought on by stress," Thorne said, looking sad. "He was highly susceptible to manipulation. He told me often that his wife, the defendant, threatened to leave him if he didn't sign over his assets. He was terrified of her." Claire felt the rage boiling in her chest. It was a complete fabrication. Ethan had never met this man. "Thank you, Doctor," Blackwood said, smirking at Claire. "Your witness, Ms. Bennett. If you have any questions, perhaps you'd like to ask him what the special of the day is." Laughter erupted from the Sterling side of the room. Claire walked slowly toward the witness stand. She didn't have a law degree, but she had spent 5 years living in a house of vipers, and she had spent 10 years waiting tables, learning to read people who were lying about their bill. "Dr. Thorne," Claire asked, her voice steady, "you say you treated my husband for 6 months?" "Yes," Thorne said, looking bored. "And these sessions, were they in person?" "Exclusively. Ethan felt paranoid about phones." "I see," Claire said. She walked back to her table and picked up a piece of paper, not legal evidence, but a simple travel itinerary she had kept in her purse as a memento. "You stated in your affidavit that your intensive sessions began on June 1st of this year." "That is correct. And you met twice a week?" "Yes, Tuesdays and Thursdays." Claire turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I would like to submit Exhibit A. It is a flight manifest and hotel receipt from the Ritz-Carlton in Tokyo." Blackwood's head snapped up. "Tokyo?" Judge Mercer asked. "Yes," Claire said, facing the doctor. On June 1st, Ethan and I were in Japan for his company's tech summit. We were there for 3 weeks. We didn't return to Boston until June 22nd. She stared at Thorne. So, Doctor, unless you conducted these in-person sessions on a bullet train to Kyoto, you are committing perjury. Thorne's face went pale. He looked at Blackwood for help. Perhaps I got the dates wrong, Thorne stammered. My filing system. You filed a sworn affidavit. Claire's voice rose, commanding the room. You claimed he was terrified of me. But in Tokyo, we were celebrating our anniversary. You never met him. You were hired by Arthur Sterling to smear a dead man's memory. Objection! Blackwood roared, losing his cool. The defendant is badgering the witness. Sustained, Mercer said. But he was glaring at Dr. Thorne. Dr. Thorne, you will step down, and you will remain in the courthouse. I may have questions for the medical board regarding your license. Thorne scurried off the stand like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. Claire stood alone in the center of the room. Her hands were shaking, but she didn't show it. She had drawn first blood. Mrs. Sterling, Judge Mercer said, his tone significantly more respectful. Do you have any further witnesses? No witnesses, Your Honor, Claire said, but I have evidence that negates the need for any. She lifted the heavy briefcase onto the table. Mr. Blackwood's entire case rests on the Sterling Family Trust, Claire said. He claims that because there is no original will, the assets revert to Arthur Sterling. That is the law, Blackwood snapped, though he looked uneasy. It is the law based on the 1980 Trust Charter, Claire said. She opened the briefcase and pulled out the blue leather-bound document. But that charter was amended. Arthur Sterling, sitting in the back, suddenly stood up. His face, usually a mask of boredom, was twisted in shock. Where did you get that? Sit down, Mr. Sterling, the bailiff barked. Your Honor, Claire continued, ignoring Arthur. This is the Sterling Family Constitution, Amendment 1998. It was hidden in a hollowed-out book in the public library, placed there by my husband before he died. He knew his parents would destroy it. Objection! Blackwood shouted. Authentication! We have never seen this document. It could be a forgery created by this desperate woman. It bears the notary seal of Judge William H. Rehnquist, Claire read from the stamp, and it is signed by Ethan's grandfather. Judge Mercer extended his hand. Bring it here. Claire approached the bench and handed the heavy document to the judge. Mercer put on his reading glasses. The room was silent. The only sound was the turning of thick parchment pages. Mercer stopped on page 12. He read it. Then he read it again. He looked up over his glasses at Arthur Sterling. The look was one of pure disgust. Mr. Blackwood, Judge Mercer said quietly, are you aware of the content of Article 4, Section 2, regarding the guardian of the trust? I am not, Your Honor. My client provided me with the 1980 Charter. Your client lied to you, Mercer said. Or perhaps you helped him bury it. Mercer cleared his throat and began to read aloud. In the event that the primary trustee, Arthur Sterling, engages in any act of moral turpitude, defined herein as any felony under state or federal law, or any act that brings public shame upon the Sterling name, his status as trustee is immediately revoked ab initio, from the beginning. Mercer paused. It continues. In such an event, the entirety of the trust assets shall bypass the offending trustee and vest immediately and absolutely in the primary beneficiary, Ethan Sterling, or his surviving spouse, regardless of blood relation, to ensure the protection of the estate from corruption. Beatrice screamed. It was a sharp, animalistic sound. That's a lie. The old man was senile when he wrote that. "We're not done," Claire interrupted. She held up the black USB drive. "The clause requires proof of a felony. This drive contains the unredacted ledgers of the Sterling Corporation for the last 10 years. She turned to face Arthur. "Money laundering," Claire said firmly. "Tax evasion, wire fraud. Ethan found it all. That's why you froze the accounts. You weren't trying to keep the money from me. You were trying to stop me from hiring a forensic accountant who would find this." Blackwood's face had gone grey. He began packing his briefcase. "Mr. Blackwood?" Judge Mercer asked. "Where are you going?" "I am withdrawing as counsel, Your Honor," Blackwood said quickly. "I cannot represent a client who has committed fraud upon the court. I was not made aware of these criminal elements." "You coward!" Arthur yelled at his lawyer. "Sit down, Arthur," Judge Mercer commanded. His voice thundered through the courtroom. "Bailiff, lock the doors. No one leaves." Mercer turned his gaze back to the document. "There is one more paragraph here. A handwritten addendum." Claire blinked. She hadn't seen a handwritten part. "It says," Mercer read, squinting at the faded ink, "and in the event of my death, if my grandson Ethan chooses a wife, let it be known that the Sterling legacy is not in the blood, but in the character. If she stands by him against his father, she is the true Sterling." Mercer looked at Claire. A small, sad smile touched his lips. "It seems, Mrs. Sterling, that Ethan's grandfather predicted this war 30 years ago." "The evidence on the drive?" Blackwood asked from the exit, trying to save his own skin. "It hasn't been verified." "We can verify it right now," a voice called from the back of the courtroom. The doors swung open. Sarah Jenkins walked in, flanked by 2 FBI agents in windbreakers. "Sorry I'm late, Claire," Sarah said, breathless, a bruise forming on her cheek. "I had a hard time convincing the precinct that I wasn't a public nuisance. But these gentlemen from the Bureau were very interested in the tip Ethan sent them before he died." One of the FBI agents stepped forward. "Arthur and Beatrice Sterling? You are under arrest for racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Beatrice lunged at Claire, her nails clawing the air, screaming obscenities. "You ruin everything! You gutter trash!" Beatrice shrieked as the bailiff restrained her. Claire didn't flinch. She stood tall, her hand resting on the blue leather book. "I didn't ruin anything, Beatrice," Claire said, her voice cutting through the noise. "I just finished the game." Arthur Sterling was handcuffed. He didn't scream. He just stared at Claire with cold, dead eyes. "You think you've won? You don't know the burden of this money. It will crush you." "I'm not afraid of work," Claire replied. "I used to carry trays heavier than you." As the police dragged the Sterlings away, the cameras flashed blindingly. But Claire didn't look at them. She looked at Judge Mercer. "Case dismissed," Mercer said, banging the gavel. "Judgment for the defense. The estate of Ethan Sterling, and the Sterling Trust, belongs solely to Claire Sterling." The bang of the gavel echoed like a gunshot, but this time it didn't signal the end of her life. It signaled the beginning. The weeks following the trial were a blur of flashbulbs, legal documents, and the slow, grinding machinery of justice. The arrest of Arthur and Beatrice Sterling dominated the news cycle for a month. The waitress widow had become a folk hero, the face of the underdog biting back. But for Claire, the victory wasn't found in the headlines. It was found in the silence of the Sterling estate. She stood in the grand foyer, the same place where she had been barred entry just weeks ago. The marble floors were cold. The portraits of stern ancestors, Arthur's ancestors, stared down at her judgmentally. "Mrs. Sterling." Claire turned. Henderson, the chauffeur who had been forced to escort her away at the funeral, stood in the doorway, holding a box of keys. He looked uncertain, perhaps expecting to be fired. Beatrice had fired half the staff in a rage before her arrest. The rest were terrified of the new mistress. "Henderson," Claire said softly, "please come in." I wanted to return the keys to the fleet, ma'am," Henderson said, looking at his shoes, "and to tender my resignation. I know my presence reminds you of unpleasant times." Claire looked at the older man. She remembered how he had slipped her an umbrella when Beatrice wasn't looking. She remembered him driving Ethan to chemo appointments when Arthur couldn't be bothered. "Do you need a job, Henderson?" Well, at my age, it's difficult," he admitted. "Good," Claire said, "because I'm doubling your salary, and I need you to hire back everyone Beatrice fired. The gardeners, the cooks, the maids, everyone. With back pay." Henderson looked up, his eyes wide. "Ma'am?" "This house has been a fortress for too long," Claire said, walking over to the window that overlooked the sprawling grounds. "I want it to be a home, and I can't do that alone." The boardroom shark. 3 months later, the real test began. The Sterling Corporation was in chaos. With Arthur in federal custody, awaiting trial for racketeering, the stock had plummeted. The board of directors, 12 men in expensive suits who had played golf with Arthur for decades, called an emergency meeting to oust Claire. They expected her to be a silent owner. They expected her to take the dividends and go shopping in Paris. When Claire walked into the boardroom on the 40th floor of the Prudential Tower, the conversation died instantly. She wore a tailored white suit, no longer the black of mourning. Sarah Jenkins walked beside her, now appointed general counsel. "Gentlemen," Claire said, taking the seat at the head of the table. Arthur's seat. "Mrs. Sterling," said Robert Vance, the interim CEO. He was a man who smiled too much. "We were just discussing the buyout offer. A competitor has offered a generous sum for the company. We believe it's best to sell, liquidate, and let you retire in comfort. You've been through enough." Claire picked up the dossier in front of her. She didn't open it. "You think I should sell?" she asked. "Ideally," Vance said. "The business is complex. Logistics, international trade. It's not exactly waiting tables, is it?" A few men chuckled. Claire smiled. It was the smile she used to give customers who complained about the price of soup while wearing a Rolex. "You're right, Robert. It's not waiting tables," Claire said. "In a restaurant, if someone is stealing from the register, I catch them by counting the receipts at the end of the night. Here, you hide it in consulting fees." The room went dead silent. Claire opened a folder Sarah handed her. "I've spent the last month with forensic accountants. Robert, you've been billing the company $50,000 a month for a consulting firm registered to your wife's maiden name in the Caymans. Is that logistics?" Vance turned the color of ash. She turned to the man on his left. "And you, Mr. Galloway, you've been shorting our own stock. Betting against us." Claire stood up. She wasn't tall, but in that moment she looked 10 feet high. "My husband died trying to clean up this company," she said, her voice ringing with steel. "I am not selling his legacy. I am fixing it. Everyone named in this folder is fired, effective immediately. Security is waiting outside to escort you. The rest of you, get to work." As the security team filed in to remove the corrupt executives, Sarah leaned over to Claire. "That was terrifying," Sarah whispered. "I learned how to deal with drunks and bullies a long time ago," Claire whispered back. "These guys just wear better ties." A year passed. The snow was falling softly on the cemetery, blanketing the world in white. It was peaceful. Claire walked up the path to the Sterling family plot. It looked different now, The weeds were gone, replaced by meticulously cared-for winter roses. She stopped in front of 2 graves. The first was fresh. Arthur Sterling. He had died of a heart attack in prison 3 months into his sentence. Beatrice was still serving hers, sending Claire bitter letters that Claire burned without reading. The second grave was Ethan's. Claire knelt in the snow, not caring about the cold. She placed a new object on the headstone. It wasn't a flower. It was a white knight chess piece. "I did it, Ethan," she whispered to the stone. "We cleaned house. The company is funding a legal defense grant now, the Checkmate Foundation. We're helping people who can't afford lawyers fight against people like your father." She touched the cold marble. The grief was still there, a dull ache that would never fully go away, but the sharp, jagged edge of it was gone. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was the woman he had always seen, even when she couldn't see it herself. "I miss you," she said, her breath misting in the air. "But I'm okay. I'm really okay." She stood up, brushing the snow from her knees. As she turned to leave, she saw a young woman standing near the gate. The girl looked freezing, wearing a thin coat, clutching a large envelope. She looked terrified. Claire recognized that look. It was the look of someone who had lost everything and didn't know where to turn. Claire walked over to the gate. The chauffeur, Henderson, opened the rear door of the black sedan, but Claire waved him off for a moment. "Can I help you?" Claire asked the girl. The girl jumped. Are you Claire Sterling?" "I am." "My name is Julie," the girl stammered, tears welling in her eyes. I read about you. My husband's family. They took my daughter. They have all the money, and I have nothing. I don't know what to do." Claire looked at the girl. She saw herself standing in the rain a year ago, holding 3 boxes of paperbacks. Claire smiled. It was a warm, dangerous smile. "Get in the car, Julie," Claire said, opening the door. "What?" "Get in," Claire repeated. "We're going to get you a lawyer. And then we're going to get your daughter back." "Why would you help me?" the girl sobbed. Claire looked back at Ethan's grave one last time, then at the girl. "Because," Claire said, "the Queen protects the board." The car door closed, shutting out the cold. As the black sedan drove away, the snow continued to fall, covering the footprints of the past, leaving a blank white canvas for the future. And that is the story of how one hidden clause destroyed an empire of greed. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the people who are underestimated are the most dangerous ones to cross. Ethan left Claire a key, but the real weapon was her resilience. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a part of the next saga. What would you have done in Claire's shoes? Would you have taken the settlement or fought to the bitter end? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.